Good evening. Good evening. I'm Alicia Swayze, the Reynolds Professor of Business Journalism, and it is my pleasure to host a conversation with Marty Barron, our guest for the 78th Knight Ethics Institute. Marty earned the title of America's Best Editor because his newsrooms at the Miami Herald, the Boston Globe, and the Washington Post earned 18 Pulitzer Prizes. Now Marty has written a book, Collision of Power, Trump, Bezos, and the Washington Post. It's a svelte 548 pages.
You practiced that.
I did practice that. I'm doing my arm curls, too. And we're 5 weeks from the election, so we have a lot to talk about. But first, please join me in welcoming Marty back to Washington and Lee.
Thank you.
Do you want to rebuttal?
I think we should begin by clarifying that the length of the book includes the index and the endnotes,
yes.
which are quite substantial and probably reduces the total number of pages by about 100.
It was 458 without them. I counted.
There you go.
Yes.
So svelte is
precision.
the proper
It
word
is,
then,
yes,
right?
svelte. Yes. Okay. Now that we got that out of the way. You know, the book opens with a wonderful story that no one ever read in the Washington Post, and that was your dinner at the White House. So just dish here. Tell us what that was like.
Okay, so that was a dinner that it was shortly after Trump got into the White House, several months afterwards, June actually, and our publisher, Fred Ryan, was really interested in having, a meeting with the new president of the United States. He felt that, the preeminent paper in the nation's capital should meet with the president of the United States. And I was very nervous about this meeting for a variety of reasons. So first of all, he wanted our owner, Jeff Bezos, to come along. We had been telling the world, accurately as it turns out, that Bezos was not involved in our news coverage. But I felt that if the word got out about this meeting, people would think that Bezos was involved in our news coverage. And it would also signal to Trump that Bezos was involved in the news coverage. So I was nervous about that. I was nervous about the fact that Donald Trump is a highly transactional person. If he did us the favor of having dinner with us, he would expect something really substantial in return. And turned out to be correct about that. So I was very concerned about this and very nervous about it. But our publisher assured me that he had told the president's people that there wasn't going to be any quid pro quo here, that it's not like we were going to change our coverage because we were having dinner there, that this was just a get-to-know-you kind of session. So we did have it. We went through an entrance where the press doesn't normally go through with the purpose of not being detected. Bezos, his limo came in through a gate to the White House, so he wasn't detected. So nobody actually knew about this meeting, and until I wrote this chapter for the book, nobody at the Post even knew about this meeting except for the people involved, which were me, our publisher Fred Ryan, Jeff Bezos, our editorial page editor at the time, who since sadly passed away, Fred Hyatt, and obviously Donald Trump was there, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, was there, and Melania was there. Ivanka was supposed to be there, but she went to the congressional baseball game because Steve Scalise from the House had been shot in a practice session for it by a Trump-hating individual. And so she went to the baseball game. And the explanation for Trump not going to the baseball game was that there were security issues. Well, the reason was because we were at the White House and he was going to have dinner with us instead. So during the dinner, he was, gracious. Trump was gracious in a sort of superficial way and showing us around the White House. He gave us a little tour. There were many inaccuracies in the account of what the history of the White House, but
I can only imagine.
In any event, it was a nice dinner. But he was constantly. He did almost all. I know this will surprise you, but he did almost all of the talking at the dinner, and he was talking mostly directly to Jeff Bezos, who was across on the other side of the table. And he would boast about the usual things. He had beaten the Clinton clan. He had beaten the Bush clan. Our nuclear weapons didn't work before, but now under him they were going to work. That the economy had instantly turned around because he had become president of the United States. A whole range of things like that. And then, most tellingly to me, he pulled out a sheet of paper from his coat pocket, and it said 47%. And he said, that's the latest Rasmussen poll about my approval, and I can win again with that. So as of June of 2017, he was already thinking about what it would take to win, and he was already thinking the 47% is really what his support was. He didn't win the popular vote, but he could win with 47% because of the Electoral College. And so he was already thinking that what the message to me was, I'm going to govern for my base, because the base is what put me in here, and I'm going to govern for the electorate, portion of the electorate that got me elected to the White House in the first place. And he would criticize the Post during the dinner, and regularly I was sitting to his left, and regularly when he would say something negative about the Post, he would just poke me with his left arm. And I was so tempted to, I did not do that. There's Secret Service people around. So, and then he called Bezos the next day to complain. He called him at 8 o'clock in the morning on his cell. He said something, can't you do something? He said, I don't know whether you get involved in news coverage or not, but can't you make but I'm sure you do to some extent. I mean, totally contradictory right there. And he said, can't you do something to make the Post more fair to me, is how he put it. And Bezos said, well, I don't get involved in the news coverage, and if I did, I would regret it for the rest of my life. And that kind of ended there. And then about a week later, Trump called me to complain about a story. And he said words that I never thought I would ever hear from the President of the United States. He said that the story it portrayed him as if he were a little boy. Yes. And then he said, I am not a little boy, which sounded to me like comments of, that were like a kid that would say that. And then he called me another week later about another story, and he said, he was complaining about the story, and he said it was, that it must have been Amazon, it must be Bezos that was doing this. And I said, I pushed back, and I said, well, that's not true, and it's not true. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he was accustomed to hearing that from anybody. And he then broke out in profanities, called us nothing but a hate machine, a big fat lie, all that sort of stuff. And he was on the phone for quite a while. I mean, I wasn't saying much. He was talking, and I was like, I don't know about the President of the United States, but I got other things to do today.
We're on deadline over here.
And finally I just said, well, when I finally could inject, I said, well, thank you for calling. I appreciate you calling me to give me your perspective on all this. And that was it. That's the last I ever heard from him.
Wow. On his first day as president, Trump said he was at war with the media. What was your response to that?
Yeah, so the background is that he, on his first full day at the White House, he went to the CIA. He had already had a rough relationship with the CIA. He had accused the intelligence agencies of being involved in what he called the Russia hoax, and was blaming the CIA. It actually accused intelligence agencies of being essentially Nazis. That's the word that he used. And so standing in front of a memorial to fallen CIA agents, he then said, as you know, I'm at war with the media, seeming to want to enlist the intelligence agencies in the war of their new commander-in-chief. And so 2 weeks later, I was asked at a conference, well, what is your reaction? And I said, well, we're not at war with the administration, we're at work. And that went completely viral. I was totally shocked. It just went completely viral. Somebody even made up a T-shirt with it. And I got no royalties whatsoever. And made a T-shirt of it. And I mean, I can talk about what I meant by that. I mean, I think it's worth talking about. And that is, I think, we should I think back to the First Amendment and James Madison, who was the principal author of the First Amendment. And in talking about the need for the First Amendment, he talked about the need for freely examining public characters and measures. And, well, free, I hope we understand that word. Public characters being politicians, government officials, people who have authority and power, people who influence government. and the measures being the policies that affect our daily lives. But the word that I focus on is examining, and that is that our job is to look behind the curtain and underneath the surface, we're not stenographers, okay? We're beyond that. And so, we figure out who did what and why, who influenced those decisions and with what intent, who's affected by those decisions and how. Those are the kinds of things that journalists are supposed to be looking at. And certainly when it comes to the President of the United States, who is inarguably the most powerful person on the planet. And so we have an absolute duty to be examining the President of the United States. That is why we had the First Amendment. That's what James Madison was talking about. And I see it as an almost sacred duty on our part to deliver for the public.
That's been one of your hallmarks throughout your career, is to hold the powerful to account. And you certainly did it in Boston with the investigation of the Catholic Church. One of the things I noticed in watching the campaign back then and through its presidency was journalists spent so much time chasing whatever he said on Twitter, now X. What do you think in terms of how much attention journalists should give to that kind of back and forth on social media?
Yeah, or anywhere. I mean, I think that, there's a big debate about that, and I think it's really hard because the truth is that what he said on social media was a window into his mind. I mean, I think now, with the passage of time, we know that was like an insight into actually what he was thinking, how he thinks, for better or for worse, and how he thinks, and the policies that he intended to implement. And so you couldn't pay attention to every single one of those tweets. You had to figure out which ones are really substantial, which ones have real significance and consequence. And that's a hard thing to do in real time, and people expect us to make these judgments in real time. I mean, they want information like that. And the tricky part is that people talk about, well, platforming him. It's not a word that I particularly like, meaning that we actually said what the President of the United States was saying. And you get criticized one way or the other, okay? So if you do report on what he said, people are saying, why are you platforming him? You're just giving him more attention than he deserves. And then if you don't report on what he says, people say, why did you not report on what he said? It was so outrageous. Yeah. And so you get it from both sides. And that's, I guess, to be expected in this business. But you do have to make the judgments, and people can agree or disagree with those judgments. But those are judgments that have to be made pretty much instantaneously.
Yeah. Some of his criticism of journalism, of course, had an impact beyond the U.S. You wrote about his sending dangerous signals to other world leaders on extinguishing press critics. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, I mean, the United States has always sort of been a beacon for a free and independent press. It's built into the First Amendment, it's built into the Bill of Rights, and it's there in the First Amendment. The press is specifically mentioned. Not that we have any special rights. We have the same rights of free expression as everybody else. Mm-hmm. And so when you have a president who has sworn to uphold the Constitution, criticizing the very idea of a free press, and doing everything as possible to discredit us, and worse than that, to actually dehumanize us. Right. That sends a signal to other world leaders that, look, if the United States doesn't care about this stuff, why would we care about it? Clearly, if we do something to repress the journalists in our country, to extinguish any sort of free and independent press, he's not going to do anything about it. And sure enough, so in Turkey, we had an opinion columnist, Khashoggi, who was writing for us. He was a resident of the United States, but he was living in Turkey, and he was about to get married. He walks into the Turkish consulate, into the Saudi consulate. He was of Saudi citizen. He walks into the Saudi consulate, and he never comes out. And the Saudi government immediately denied that anything had happened, that he had left, there was nothing. And, well, what did happen, actually, it turns out, which the Saudis later acknowledged happened, is that he was murdered there. He wasn't just murdered, he was dismembered. They cut him up, all right, and disposed of his body, and it has yet to be found. We have no idea where his body is, and they lied about it. And I think the reason that authoritarians like, the Saudi crown prince in that instance, who the CIA has assessed was aware of that and actually ordered that assassination, either to have him kidnapped or assassinated, one of the two, is that they realize that the President of the United States isn't going to care about that. It's just a journalist. And so I think that, when you have the President of the United States sends a signal that not only does he not care about journalists, but he thinks they should be locked up, imprisoned, and he often talks about, he says, we should imprison journalists and they'll meet their bride, is how he puts it, which means that they'll be sexually assaulted. When you have somebody talking like that, then it sends a signal to leaders elsewhere in the world, and they can act on their own authoritarian impulses.
And I know he joked around with Putin about, I like how you deal with journalists.
Yeah, he did that, and he said in his own rallies that he would like to see journalists imprisoned, and as he puts it, they'll meet their bride there. So I mean, that is, that's that language. People around the world, leaders around the world, they look at that, they pay a lot of attention to what the President of the United States is saying, and they know very well that he doesn't care at all about what happens to journalists.
You note in the book, in the instance of the Saudi prince, it came out later then that Trump and Jared Kushner had some pretty deep ties to the Saudi prince.
Well, immediately after Trump left office, he entered into an agreement with the Saudi government for the development of golf courses, and then Jared Kushner was given, I think it was $1 billion to manage. He gets fees right off the top, whether they perform well or not, like so many asset managers, and he's being enriched by this. And nobody has actually established that this is a quid pro quo. But look, I mean, the arrangement is suspect. I mean, there's no question. Look, I mean, the Saudi government is actually compensating former President of the United States and his son-in-law, and Trump may well be president again. And so what do we make of that? And did Trump make decisions regarding Khashoggi and his reaction to the Saudis with the idea that maybe, look, he's going to be doing business with the Saudis, we'll keep that in mind. So, so why pressure the Saudis if you're expected to do business with them? He's talked openly about how he saved them. He saved the Saudis from action by the U.S. Congress, and that they owed him. He said they owed him. Well, I guess somebody paid him back.
Yeah. Is it surprising to you that more Americans don't find that outrageous?
I'm surprised by very little these days.
Yeah.
I got to tell you. So everything is, nothing's ever surprising, but everything is shocking. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So first of all, I don't know how many Americans are actually aware of the details of that. Maybe if everybody read my book, they would all become aware of that.
That's
so
what it's all about tonight.
A little plug
Marty,
there. No doubt there'll be
yeah.
mass purchases now around the country.
Well, because this live stream does travel.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people don't know that. People are voting for a whole variety of reasons. I mean, and that's totally understandable. People who are supporting Trump, they feel that he is their voice, that he speaks for them, he speaks like them. They're concerned about the border, they're concerned about inflation, they're concerned about the wars that we're involved in that have gone on for, in the case of Ukraine, for a couple of years, and in the Middle East, all of that. They blame Biden for that, whether they should or shouldn't, but that's that they assess blame, and there are a whole variety of other reasons. And so even people who don't have a particularly high opinion of Trump vote for him. I mean, if you look at the polls, the public assesses that Kamala Harris is twice as many people assess her to be truthful as assess him to be truthful. But they vote for him anyway. I mean, he's got about roughly 50% support in the country. She has about 50% support. So a lot of people who don't think that he's truthful, don't think that he's principled, don't like his own personal behavior, they're still going to vote for him.
Yeah. Let's stick with that theme for a little bit. Back in 2016, there was a lot written about how journalists failed to truly understand voters' anger and the anti-elitist sentiments that they felt. Do you think the journalists learned anything from that? And, the outcome now in this coverage? Is any more in touch with that?
Well, I think we've learned something. We may be slow learners, but I do think people have learned things. He's just he's a very hard guy to cover. So for a variety of reasons. One is that he just says so many things that are untrue,
Right.
and just the sheer volume of that. I mean, when the Post, we kept count,
Yes.
with our sort of fact checkers, and at the end of his 4 years in office, it was well over 30,000 lies, and hundreds in a single day. So how you keep up with that is just really. I mean, that team, they're 3 people. They'd never been busier in their entire
Right.
lives. So, but also in terms of understanding the American public, yes, I do think that the big mistake, well before Donald Trump became a candidate, is that we didn't understand the American public well enough, getting around the country well enough. To understand that there was support for a person like Donald Trump, that's what they wanted. They didn't want a Jeb Bush who had been called the front runner. It was anti-elite. The press was deemed to be the elite. A feeling of having been ignored, understandable, given what's transpired in so many communities where people are really struggling and they don't see opportunities for themselves or their kids. Totally understandable that way. And they wanted somebody who was just going to go to Washington and set fire to the place, essentially, or punch the elites in the face. And so, now I think that the press generally, I say we, even though I've retired, but I think that people are much more direct about when he's not telling the truth, and I think that's for the better. But I think some mistakes have been made. I think early on he gave an interview to CNN well before any primary was held, and they declared him to be the front runner well before any primary had been held. They had an interview. The reason that they had that interview was to demonstrate that CNN was open to Republicans. Yeah. And that's a marketing reason. That has nothing to do with journalism. That's just a marketing reason. And I don't think that's the reason that you do interviews like that. I think it was way too early. And then NBC did the same thing with they had a new host for Meet the Press. What do? Get an interview with Donald Trump. He was only too happy to accept. And as usual, he steamrolled the interviewer, and then he's a very difficult person to interview because he just talks right over you, and then says things that are just not true, and you can't just constantly be fact-checking the guy in a live interview. So in any event, so that was done for marketing reasons too. It was just done to promote a new host for Meet the Press. I don't think that's a good reason. So I think there have been some real mistakes that have been made. And I think that some of the current criticism that when he says things and he says they're incoherent, I mean, if you actually look at what he said, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, that people should very directly show exactly what he said, because it doesn't make any sense. And I don't think the press hasn't done as good a job of that as they should have. They're doing it more now, but I think at the beginning they weren't doing it as they were trying to. I mean, the phrase that's been used is sane washing. So I don't particularly like that phrase because it's a description of sanity. It's not an issue of sanity, it's an issue of coherence. And he's been incoherent. And so I haven't come up with an alternative phrase, but they are sort of rounding the edges of many statements of his that make no sense whatsoever.
When you talking about getting in touch with Americans, when you were the editor of the Post, what did you do to try and address that in terms of, because most media companies are based on the East Coast, so what steps did you take to try and get more coverage of Middle America?
Sure. Well, we created an extensive freelance network around the country. And we drew upon the ideas coming from those reporters all over the country, and it was called the Washington Post Talent Network. When we opened it up and took applications, we got 1,000 applications in a single week, and So there was that. We also started to reestablish some national bureaus that had been closed down, but I said at the time that I didn't want those bureaus to be in the major metro areas because, like Chicago to cover the Midwest, or San Francisco to cover the West, I wanted them to be in places where we were going to get a better take on what were the sentiments of the country. So one of them, for example, was put in Kansas City, and the other one was in San Antonio.
Well, then you could get ahead of the Taylor Swift story in Kansas. No, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
well, there you go.
I'm kidding. I digress. So let's go back to some of the juicy stuff in the book here. So the New York Times and Post are competitors, but there were times when the senior leadership teams of both papers had some secret meetings because of shared concern about Trump. Tell us about how that came about, and what were the conversations and outcomes?
Right. Well, those were, there was only like one little item somewhere that disclosed that we had had a meeting, but they didn't really know what it was all about. And so, I could uncork the bottle for my book and describe what those meetings were all about. Jeff Bezos didn't have a relationship with the New York Times folks. He didn't really know them. Actually, Arthur Sulzberger, who was leading the New York Times when Bezos took over the Post, had actually reached out and invited Bezos to talk at one of their own retreats. Bezos, not only did he not accept, he didn't even respond. Given that Trump was constantly attacking the press, what happened was I had given a speech, I had gotten some award, and I was giving a speech, and Bezos showed up, which was a big surprise to me. And it was right before Trump was going to get into the White House. He had been elected, but just before he entered the White House. And I said that our jobs was going to be incredibly difficult, that we had a president who's now going to exert enormous pressure on us, and that, I was describing what the challenge was. And right after that, Bezos proposed that we have, maybe we should get together with the New York Times, because while we weren't going to establish some sort of pact or anything like that, he said it would be important for us to have a good relationship with them, because you never knew what could happen. Well, I already had a good relationship with them. I had worked for Arthur Sulzberger. I was a friend of the editor of the New York Times, even though we were competing with each other. I knew the CEO. I knew all of those folks and had a good relationship. But so we started to meet, and it was all super secret. We met in private rooms at restaurants, and a couple of restaurants, one in Manhattan initially, and then at the private home in Georgetown of the publisher, and then the final one was at a restaurant picked by the New York Times. Bad choice. There were so many people there, we couldn't be missed, and somebody noticed, and guess what? There happened to be some media reporters there too. So
Excellent.
I don't know what the New York Times was thinking, but they picked this place where it was going to be obvious that we were all there, and so somebody wrote a short item, but the editor of the New York Times said, Arthur had a good relationship with Don Graham, and now they have new ownership at the Post, so it's just a way to, it was more than that. There was no agreement or anything like that. But it was a way of sort of fortifying the relationship, because we knew we were going to need each other if we really came under fierce attack from Trump, and that who knew what could happen.
How long did those go on?
How long?
Had the meetings, did they continue?
No, we had 3 of them.
Just
That's
3?
it.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask how long did the dinner go on.
No,
as long as the bottles of wine lasted, I think is what it was.
Do you remember what was served? No.
I don't, sadly.
All right. So you were pretty new in the job when the Grahams sold the paper to Jeff Bezos.
Right.
What was your reaction?
So I joined the paper in January of 2013, January 1, although my first day was really January 2nd. And then it was in August that I learned, like 5 days before the public announcement, that Bezos was going to acquire it. And that was a huge shock to me, obviously. I thought, look, we were owned by, the Washington Post was owned by a parent company. The parent company's name was the Washington Post Company. I thought, if anything, a company called the Washington Post Company, owned by the Graham family, would forever keep the Washington Post. But hey, they didn't. So Don Graham actually asked me to come. So my publisher told me about this, and she said, Don Graham's going to call you tonight, and he's going to want to talk to you about it. And I said, okay. So, meantime, I was scheduled to have dinner with Sally Quinn, the widow of Ben Bradley, and so I couldn't talk about it at the dinner. And then I went home. I was called Don. He didn't answer. I went home. As soon as I got home, Don called me, and he said, come over to his place. So I went over to his place, and he said, look, I apologize. We were talking about selling the Post when we hired you, and it's not something you signed up for. And I said, well, look, this is the way things go. I'm not naive about this. And he said, no, but I really want to, I really feel bad. I want to apologize to you because it's not something you expected. And I said, look, I understand how business works, And then we went one more round on that. And then finally, and I said, no, it's okay. You don't have to, it's okay, Don. And he said, would you let me apologize? And my feeling was, as much as I revered the Graham family, and I do, and the way that they were a wonderful steward for the Post over 80 years, we didn't have a business model for succeeding. We were going to be heading into more cuts, probably more than 50 people in the newsroom. I'd already done 35. They said they were going to go easy on me in the first year, but our financials looked really terrible. And so I was not looking forward to having to make those kinds of cuts. And I thought, well, Bezos doesn't like to shrink, he likes to grow. And on top of that, he'll bring some fresh thinking. And God knows we need fresh thinking in our field, a lot of it. And he knows tech, and he knows, it's not just tech and his money, but he knows consumer business, and he understands consumers. So I thought, well, this is going to be good for the Post. I didn't know if it was going to be good for me. In fact, I was pretty sure it wouldn't be good for me, because the usual equation is new owner, new editor.
Right.
But fortunately, he kept me around for a year. And then he did fire our publisher, Catherine Weymouth, who is the
Graham's granddaughter.
Right, is the niece of
Yeah.
Don Graham. And then I figured, well, they've got a new publisher, and the usual equation is new publisher, new editor. It didn't happen, so I don't know. I'm a lucky guy. I didn't get fired. But I felt like it was going to be good for us, and that we would get some fresh thinking and fresh investment, and that there was a possibility of growing. And as it turned out, because of a new strategy that we set, that we were able to succeed, and we had 6 straight years of profitability.
You mentioned in the book that he actually understood and appreciated some of the virtues of a printed newspaper, even though he then quickly said, but that's not the way we're going. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so he really, it was interesting for somebody who had never been involved in the media business. He was a reader, and he did have a real strong appreciation for the qualities of what a print newspaper has, and he assessed them in a way that I'd never really heard any owner or publisher or editor actually describe them. And he talked about, the sense of hierarchy that you get from a newspaper, like what's really important, what's not important. You get a sense of completion with a newspaper. If you read it, you're done, as opposed to the internet, where you're constantly thinking this, you haven't read anything. On top of that, there's things on the internet that you see at one moment, and then they're gone, and you don't know where to find them. And there are all sorts of visual cues with a newspaper, a physical newspaper, that can be missing in online. So when we were trying to, at the time, he wanted to develop a new tablet app, and he said he wanted to try to create an app that captured those attributes, those good attributes of a physical newspaper, onto a digital device, because we weren't going to be,
Right.
The future was not in a physical newspaper. How could we capture those onto a tablet app? And that was a real challenge. So, but we developed a new tablet app. That one doesn't exist anymore, largely because it was really expensive to produce.
Yeah.
But it was very successful at the beginning.
Yeah. So, of course, the obvious question is then, did Bezos meddle in the newsroom?
Well, he didn't, and he never suggested a story. He never critiqued a story. He never suppressed a story. He never did any of that about anything. He came under enormous pressure. Enormous pressure from Trump, starting during the campaign, and the first campaign, And Trump was criticizing Bezos because of his owner. He was very upset over the coverage of the Post, and said that started calling us the Amazon Post. We weren't even owned by Amazon, and Amazon had no influence over us whatsoever. I barely knew the people at Amazon. I knew Jeff Bezos, but other than that, I didn't really, I had no contact really in any substantive way with folks at Amazon, and so. And then, he blamed Bezos and then started talking about how the postal, how Amazon was the beneficiary of subsidized postal rates, and that the federal government was helping Amazon because of low postal rates for package deliveries. And then he said, it should be double what it is. And then he said it should be triple what it is. And then he said, no, actually, it should be quadruple what. You got the sense he was just kind of making it up.
Yeah.
And surely enough, he was. But then when he got into office, one of the first things he did was go to the Postal Commissioner and said that he wanted the rates to go up. And she had to explain to him that you just can't order that. There's a process. There's like hearings, and and the Postal Commission has to evaluate it, and there has to be a justification for it. You can't just do it because the President of the United States said do it. And that was a revelation to him, I guess. And then later in the administration, look, he interfered in a gigantic $10 billion Defense Department cloud computing contract to make sure that it didn't go to Amazon.
Right.
And Amazon in the initial round did lose out to Microsoft. And there was a joke going around in the profession that it didn't cost Bezos $250 million to buy the Washington Post. It cost him $10,250 million to buy the Washington Post. And I don't know how funny he thought. I told Bezos that joke once, and I'm not sure he laughed, but I'm not sure really how funny he found the joke. But so anyway, despite all that pressure, I mean, we never had any pressure from us. And I'll give you just an anecdote. So we had after the 2016 election. Bezos was coming into town for what was supposed to be a business meeting, but I suggested that he should meet with the political staff to thank them for all the hard work that they had done during the campaign. And so he carved out, he always has a very tight schedule, and we carved out 45 minutes for him to have lunch, sandwiches with some of the key members of the political staff. And he asked me for a little briefing in advance, and I said, well, a lot of them are suffering from PTSD because of all the work they did and being under attack all the time, and now facing the prospect of another 4 years, maybe 8 years of being attacked viciously by the President of the United States. So, and wondering, did all the work we did make any difference or anything like that? So, so I met with the staff, and toward the end of the lunch, one or two people on the staff said, well, look, and he was criticizing you so forcefully during the campaign, and now he's President of the United States with a lot of power. Everybody was kind of concerned that Bezos might begin to cave because now he's a president, not just a candidate. And they said, they asked him, well, how are you feeling about that? And he said, don't worry about me. I can take care of myself. Just do your job. I mean, people practically levitated out of that meeting. I swear to God, it was unbelievable. And then they circulated in the newsroom, and you could see these people talking groups, and they were all sharing that with everybody, and it was the greatest message. It was absolutely the greatest message that could be sent to the staff. And he held to that, and he never interfered, even when we were writing about Amazon. I mean, we wrote about Amazon a lot, and Jack Schaefer, who was assessing this for Politico, saying he was hoping to document that we were somehow easier on Amazon than others, but he actually concluded that we were tougher on Amazon than others. And so, and even, we had a product reviewer, they still have a product reviewer, I believe, who would review Amazon products. He didn't have a positive thing to say about a single Amazon product, I swear to God. And one of the products, he said this just showed that Amazon was creepy. And I wonder what Bezos thinks of this. But I never asked him. I never asked him because, I didn't want to know I did want to know, but then I didn't want to know. I didn't want to hear from him about it. And if you don't want interference, you don't invite it, right? Okay, so you don't say, hey, tell me what you think. So I'm curious, but I'm not going to ask. So, and he didn't say. And we covered his personal life, which became the subject of coverage in the National Enquirer when he was divorcing and he was having an affair. I didn't hear from him about that either. So
Yeah, good. Back in 2020, and you wrote about how there was a lot of conflict among the journalists in your newsroom, and it started to really bubble up on social media. And I was surprised to read that you actually considered quitting.
oh yeah.
What was going on, and how did you get through that? And you did stick around for a little bit longer.
Yeah. Somebody asked me afterwards, how did you deal with all the pressure in that job? I said, I retired.
Yeah.
No, I mean, so I was concerned about a lot of social media activity. I felt that, look, my job is to protect the reputation of the institution, make sure that and to protect it by making sure that all of us adhere to standards. The paper has some written standards, but we also have, norms of our own behavior over a long period of time. That's why the Post had the reputation that it did. And it's why, people joined the Post. I mean, why all the people working there said they wanted to work for the Post is because of its reputation and because their own personal reputation would be enhanced by being affiliated with the Post. So I was concerned when people would engage in behavior on social media that I thought was just completely inappropriate, expressing their own political views, engaging in activities that I thought really, or expressions of opinion I think amounted to advocacy and activism, criticizing maybe their own colleagues, which I thought was just astonishing that somebody would go onto social media to criticize somebody who sits a few desks away. And the tone was terrible. It's just snark and sarcasm and lousy humor and impulsive commentary, sometimes retweeting things that were entirely unverified, people injecting themselves into stories other people's stories where nobody asked them to get involved in that. And I worried that their comments are becoming the face of the Washington Post. Not all the careful work that we did. We take great care, let's say on a particularly sensitive story, with how we write this story, what the lead is going to be, what the headline's going to be, what's the photo that we're going to use, all of that sort of stuff. And then to have one person who's not involved in the story go tweet out something that becomes like an enormous source of controversy, and all of the attention gets focused on that one person's tweet that was never subject to review, was never submitted for review, doesn't reflect our standards, and to have that person somehow become the face of the Washington Post, I was appalled by that. I was appalled by that behavior, and yet there were a lot of people on the staff who felt that that's their right. I can't be one person at home and somebody else at work, and I want to express my whole self, and we're in these terrible times where all of our core values are being challenged. The idea of free expression, civic discourse, tolerance for all people, all those kinds of things. And so I need to express myself. But my view, a lot of professions come with constraints. Your doctor is subject to constraints. Your judges are subject to constraints. All of that, you can't just say anything you want at any time. I mean, look, if we had an umpire and a baseball game, let's say between the Red Sox and the Yankees, just to pick something out of the hat, between the Red Sox and the Yankees, and you had an umpire who didn't even comment, wasn't commenting, but just was tweeting out favorable stories, but favorable stories about the Red Sox. Do you think Yankees fans would think that this umpire is going to be a fair adjudicator, fairly officiate the game? I don't think so. I know not. I think it's really important that we maintain our standards. We're not just a random collection of individuals in a newsroom.
Right.
We're an institution. And I know that in some quarters, institutions become like a bad word, but I don't think it's a bad word. I think it's a really good word. And the reason I think it's a good word is that in order to even have a strong democracy, we have to have strong institutions. We have to have a strong press that adheres to standards. We have to have strong courts that adhere to standards. We have to have a Congress that adheres to standard, and we have to have a president who adheres to standards. And I don't think there's anything to be gained if you have a president who has decided to abandon all norms of political behavior, that the answer to that is, well, we're going to abandon our norms too. We're going to blame him for abandoning the norms, and our response is going to be, well, we won't have any norms either. We will abandon all standards of behavior. I don't think that's the answer. I think that does us enormous harm as an institution. And speaking narrowly of a place like the Washington Post, my job was to protect the institution, and I did not want to be in a position where I had to defend what I thought was behavior that I thought was indefensible, and I didn't want to be held responsible for behavior that I thought was irresponsible.
One last question, and then we'll open up to the audience. I lied. I have two more. If you were still editor at the Washington Post right now, with 5 weeks till the election, what specifically would you be telling your reporters?
I don't know, take your vitamins or something like that.
Yeah.
But
you'd be getting their pizza orders for election
take
night.
your
I know that,
vitamins.
but just
no, I
based
mean, I
on
think we
what
should.
you've seen.
I think people should be doing what they should have been doing, and many have done, which is to look at, what are the policies that the candidates would intend to implement? Who are the people they're affiliated with? What are their backgrounds? What are their intentions? What are the statements that they've made in the past? What do we know about how they're going to behave once they're in? Who are the people who are influencing, who are not part of their political team, but who are outside because of their donations or expecting to gain from that particular candidate? I think that's what we owe the public is you have to cover an election as a horse race. It is a horse race. People who say that, you don't cover the horse race, well, that's just crazy. I mean, the horse race really matters. It is a horse race,
Yep.
So it's an election. And, but we have to cover the substance as well, and that is, what would they do if they came into power? And I think we owe that to the public, is to focus on that, to do the reporting that reveals who these candidates are and what they intend to do and how they intend to do it. Not just what they intend to do, but how do they expect to, given the laws and the Constitution, how is it possible that they can do some of the things that they are talking about? That's particularly true, I think, of Trump. And it's like, how would he intend to implement these measures that he's speaking about? And many of those measures are, by their very nature, authoritarian. I mean, they're the kinds of measures that we see from authoritarians in other countries. That's how they've established their own power and consolidated their power. And so we need to look at, that's how could he accomplish that, given our Constitution and given the laws of the country?
Despite all the vitriolic attacks on journalists, you did get an amazing amount of mail and emails from readers who appreciated the fact that you did believe in holding powerful people and institutions to account. What were some of the best ones that you got from readers?
Right during the campaign in 2016, we got a lot. I got a lot.
Yeah.
I started, and a lot of reporters felt that they were constantly under attack from Trump and his supporters, his allies. And when you're being attacked that regularly, it gets to you. So I wanted to demonstrate that, no, they had support. And so I would take these emails or letters or postcards, and there were a lot of them. And I would post them on there's a glass wall in the office, so I would post them on the wall, but facing out. And it became super popular. People would come by to look at them, and when they had guests in the newsroom, family and friends and associates, they would always come by and take a look at the notes. It was kind of like a little tourist attraction inside the newsroom. But there were other instances too. So, we did this big investigation of Roy Moore, who was the Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate, in the process of working on actually a feature story about support for him. Stephanie McCrumman, one of the reporters on the Post staff, came across information that he had a particular fondness for young women, even women who were they weren't women, they were girls, they were underage, and one of them credibly accused him of having sexual contact with her, and so we published that story, and then we came under assault from something called Project Veritas, which is an effort to discredit the press, takes videos, like clandestine videos and manipulates them.
Yep.
Or it's no longer in existence, but it manipulated them. And anyway, they tried to, I won't go into the details of their ruse, but we discovered it. We turned the tables. We did kind of a reverse thing on them. And it was explosive when we published that story about Project Veritas and how they had tried to get us to publish a false story or to entrap us. And the letters just poured in from that one. I mean, my favorite one was, keep taking your vitamins. So I really like that one. So it was heartening to, to know that there were people who really supported us. And it's why our subscriptions went up a lot. It's why our readership went up a lot. Because they felt that we were doing the job the press should do in this country.
Great. Well, let's open it up and take some questions. Over here, Professor Finch.
You mentioned 6 years in a row that you started making a profit. What did you do to change things? If the Post under the Rams was starting to slide, what turned it around so that you were a profitable operation?
Yeah, so when Bezos came in, he said that he thought the strategy for the Post was wrong, that it had been good in the past, but it wasn't right for the present. What was wrong? We were focused on being essentially a regional newspaper. It's true, we covered national politics, but other than that, we covered the Washington metro area, and that's it. And we saw that as our audience. In fact, it was the strategy that was recommended by Warren Buffett, who was a close friend of Don Graham. But he said that it was the wrong strategy. Bezos said it was the wrong strategy. He said, look, you have an opportunity to be national and global. You're based in the nation. Why? Because you're based in the nation's capital. You have the name, the Washington Post, which is a name that can be leveraged to a national audience and a global audience. And with that name also, the third thing that he mentioned was we had a history and heritage about holding power to account, shining a light in dark corners, all of that, going back to Watergate, essentially, and that's such that there were millions of people around the country and around the world who were aware of the Washington Post, but had never read a single word of the Washington Post, but had a good opinion of it. And so we had this strong identity, and that the internet, for all the damage that it had done to our business and destroying every economic pillar of our business, that it had given us a gift. And we were like sitting there like, what's that? The gift was, he said, was that we could distribute our journalism without having to deliver a physical newspaper, which meant that we could deliver our journalism now to people at virtually no incremental cost. Get a new subscriber at no incremental cost, get a new reader at no incremental cost. And so we should take advantage of that. And the question was, how will we do that? And so we came to him with a bunch of initiatives that he asked us to come up with ideas. We went out to his place in Medina, Washington, his house. We met in his boathouse. It's a good-sized boathouse. And a good-sized house. And so we started talking about those ideas, and we presented him with a bunch of ideas. And he said, well, what were your parameters for these ideas? And I sheepishly said, well, we just thought they were good ideas. And that wasn't the answer. That wasn't the correct answer. I didn't get an A on that answer. So, so he said, well, I think we should have some parameters for, and he said, let me suggest two. One is that it will appeal to a national audience. And the second is it an idea that will appeal to a younger audience? Because if we don't cultivate a younger audience, we won't have an audience in the future, in 20 years. He would talk about 20 years. I never heard a publisher talk about 20 years in my entire career. I was used to next quarter, next year, maybe a 2-year plan or something like that, but generally like next quarter. So that was so refreshing to hear. And then he invested in it. And he said, okay, we had these initiatives. He invested in it. He said, I'm going to give you, quote, runway, which meant some time. And almost all of them, virtually all except one that I can think of, worked out extremely well. Our audience grew. And obviously, the arrival of Donald Trump actually benefited us because, look, the Post was known. We beefed up our politics staff. We beefed up our investigation staff. There was a huge portion of the American public that wanted to see someone like Trump being held accountable, and we did a really good job of disclosing what he was about and what his administration was about when he got into the White House. And so we got a lot of support from people for that. And that translated into a significant improvement in our financial fortunes, and so we had 6 straight years of profitability.
And here.
The Washington Post and the New York Times are using an overused word, somewhat unique, in the fact that they can become a national publication and therefore derive the revenues from the kind of distribution that you just mentioned. There's 7,000 other newspapers around this country that don't have that same opportunity. Could you talk a moment about what you think the other 7,000 ought to be doing?
Right. Well, you're right in that assessment, and that's why Bezos wanted us to switch to becoming. He said, we got that opportunity, and we don't want to be part of the other 7,000, right? So I think the models are going to differ in different communities. I think we're seeing a lot of experimentation. I think the whole field of media, I mean, we're seeing a radical reinvention of how consumers obtain information and obtain news, and so the field is going to have to be radically reinvented. And the way that we disseminate news, the way that we tell stories is going to have to be radically reinvented. But I see in a lot of local news organizations, some major metros are beginning to do okay. I mean, I think the San Francisco Chronicle is doing pretty well. The one in Minneapolis, they just announced that they're going to set up a network across all of Minnesota. There are others that are showing sort of that they can succeed. I was just down in, actually just before coming here, I was in Baton Rouge and New Orleans, and the Times-Picayune and the Advocate there, which is one outfit, they're growing. I mean, they've added, a bunch of people to their staff, and they've gotten some nonprofit funding for that, and they've just grown. They just added a whole big operation in Shreveport, and so then you're seeing a lot of nonprofits that are beginning to emerge. Some are having some success. I think we have to wait and see how that works out. There is a big effort called Press Forward now that's $500 billion dedicated by many of the big foundations, the MacArthur Foundation and the Knight Foundation, where I serve on the board, but also a lot of community foundations that are beginning to support journalism, and they've helped a lot of nonprofits sort of get up off the ground and establish themselves and make sure that it's not just a bunch of well-meaning journalists, that it's, they've got the well-meaning journalists, that you need that, but also business acumen and technology savvy and fundraising, okay, fundraising capacity. And some of them are having some significant success, I mean, I did a fundraiser for Spotlight PA, which is a statewide investigative nonprofit in Pennsylvania, and they seem to be doing they're doing quite well. They're actually adding staff, and so you're seeing some some promise, but that's not to say I'm not being Pollyannish here. The challenges are absolutely immense, and they're getting even greater because now we became so dependent upon social traffic from social media sites and traffic from search engines, obviously Google, and now that's changed. Facebook isn't really putting news in there. They aren't putting news in the news feed. So they are, and Google is now providing Gen AI answers to your queries before you ever get to any links to any news site. And so people are settling for the AI answer and not going to the sites, and many news organizations are already seeing a precipitous decline in traffic as a result of that's derived from Google search. So the challenges are immense, but I am encouraged by many of these efforts around the country.
You had a hand up down here.
So you've alluded to the damage that Trump really caused to the public opinion of the press. I was in 6th grade when Trump got elected. Now I'm a sophomore journalism student, so Trump's really all that I've known. But what do we as young journalists have to do moving forward to kind of fix the problem that he's caused?
Well, I wouldn't say that he caused it. By the way, you made me feel very old, so thank you very much.
Tell me about it.
It's unavoidable these days,
What are you going to do?
Everyone. So I wouldn't say that he caused it. I mean, I think that he aggravated it. I mean, trust in journalism has been declining for quite a while, all right, ever since Watergate. I mean, it reached a high point in Watergate, and then it's been declining ever since. I think it's been made particularly worse by the internet and the fact that people can go to a site that affirms their pre-existing point of view. If you have a conspiracy theory in your head, you undoubtedly can find somebody who says that's true. I remember when, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia died. I happened to be with my younger brother somewhere, and I said, within a half hour, I said, I bet I can find a conspiracy theory online now. Yeah. And sure enough, I went on and said he was murdered, okay? Which, by the way, Trump later sort of insinuated that he might have been murdered. So it's like, it just doesn't take long to get around. And I think there are a number of things that we need to do. There are two things that I would mention that are very different in nature. One is that I think it's very important for us to cover the entirety of our communities. We need, as I mentioned before, there are all these communities that are struggling. People can't find jobs that are equivalent to what they had before. They've seen their communities hollowed out by the disappearance of industry. They don't see opportunities for their kids there. And as a result, there are all sorts of societal problems in those communities, and they find somebody to blame. I think it's really important that we just get out in the country and talk to people, setting aside politics, but what are their lives like? What do they believe in? What are they struggling with? What are their expectations? What are their aspirations? So that they see themselves fully and fairly reflected in our coverage on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's really important, because if we expect them to believe us when it comes to the most highly controversial issues, they're going to have a basis for even being receptive to us. And so, and that comes from covering people day to day in the way they are and what their beliefs are, and it doesn't even have to be politics, but just what their lives are like. So that they say, no, these people actually understand what I'm going through. So that's one thing. The second thing I would mention is that it's really important for us to be as transparent as possible, not just about who we are as people, like what our bios are, but how we went about our work. And we need to demonstrate, we need to show, not just tell. We're accustomed to just writing a story, and then people are supposed to take it on faith that that these were well reported. But now we have the possibility of providing all the documentation. It's like if we're referring to a court document, put the court document there, annotate the portion that we're referring to, but allow people to read the entire court document to see, that we're not taking things out of context, assuming we're not. So, but if it's a video, hey, fine, have a clip of the video, but provide the entire video so that people can see what happened before and what happened afterwards, not just a small clip. And let's make sure that it's not taken out of context. And if we put it there, then people can see for themselves. Same thing with an audio, okay? You can have an audio clip, but then somebody can listen to the whole thing. And if we have a data set some data that we're referring to, take people to the data set, whether it's a government agency or some other reliable source. Here's where we got this. Show them that there was a lot of work that went into this story. We didn't just sit here at our desk and make stuff up. We actually did a lot of work. And by the way, here's the message. Check our work. Go check our work. Go look at it yourself. You don't believe it? Here it is. And so that's something that I think we should be doing on a regular basis, essentially extensive footnoting of stories, not through little numbers, but through links and things like that you were demonstrating that people can go look for themselves. That extensive footnoting, the way that I extensively footnoted in this book, that caused Alicia to say that it was really big. But
no, I'm enjoying it immensely.
And the reason that I did that, by the way, is that I knew that the book would come under enormous scrutiny, and I wanted to make sure that everybody saw exactly where I got everything. So.
Okay, we have time for one more. Yeah.
Looking 20 quarters ahead.
20 quarters. It would be more than 20 quarters, by the way. It would be 80 quarters.
Looking 20 quarters ahead, tell us about the intersection of artificial intelligence and journalism as you see it.
Well, yeah. So, 2 years ago, we weren't really talking about Gen AI, right? Now that's all anybody talks about, right? So I think it's going to have an enormous impact. I think it can be used for a lot of good in our profession. And I think it can also create enormous problems, not just for our profession, but for society as a whole. So on the plus side, Gen AI can do a lot of things. Reporters these days are just way overburdened with things they have to do. You got to come up with a headline that works on social. You have to have a headline that works on search. You have to put the metadata in. You have to select the photos that go with your stories. You have to write an alert when you have a development. When you have to update your story constantly during the day. None of that existed when we had 1 edition a day or 2 editions a day or anything like that. So it's just the amount of work that's involved is just tremendous. And so AI can help with a lot of that. It can do, you know, you want to have a story and you always want to say, here are the 4 key points on the story to help the reader who doesn't want to spend a whole time with the story. Then can scan the story immediately, give you the 4 key points. You should review. A human should review that, say, oh, that's right, good, done, okay? You know, rather than relying on a reporter to go through the story and think of what the 4 key points are and craft them so that they're short enough and, you know, that it works. There are a whole range of things that can be done with Gen AI very quickly and very effectively, and that I think are entirely appropriate. It could also be used, by the way, for extensive data analysis. I mean, somebody was telling me the other day about, you know, when you have wars and there's a bomb crater, that based on satellite imagery and with Gen AI, you can evaluate what particular bomb that would generate that kind of crater. So there are a lot of things like that that it can be used for. So on the problem side, which is really considerable, is that, you know, and we've already seen this in this election, and we'll see a lot. We may see a lot more of it in the final weeks, where we are right now, and that is that, you know, there will be a lot of images that will be circulated that will be completely false, totally fabricated. And they will be still images, they will be video images, they will be fabricated audio, all of this. And that's not even half of it, okay? So what happens then is that when you have a verified video, if it reflects poorly on somebody, like a political candidate would say that was generated by AI. It's fake. And so the result is likely to be that the public will say, well, you can never tell what's true or false. And when you have a public that can't tell the difference between what's true and false, you're in a really dangerous territory. And people say, well, I'll just believe the people who are like members of my ideological tribe, for example. I believe him or her because she's saying what I think is true. And people have already confused beliefs with truth, and they'll just be more confused about what's the difference between a belief and a fact. You know, we're at a moment in society where it's not, people talk about how we can't agree on a common set of facts, but it's actually worse than that. We can't agree on what is a fact. We can't agree on how one even establishes a fact. All of the things that we've historically used to establish facts, so education, expertise, experience in the field or actual personal experience, and then finally evidence, actual evidence, they're all being dismissed and denied and denigrated and all of that. And so people can't agree on a common set of facts, but they can't even agree on, well, how do we determine what a fact is? Even stuff that we see with our own eyes and hear with our own ears, like the attack on the Capitol on January 6th of 2021. So we're in dangerous territory. Gen AI will just make that infinitely worse. And we are ill-equipped as a profession to combat that, to counteract that, because first of all, the tools while there are some tools out there, they don't always work so well. And as the techniques become more sophisticated, it'd be much more difficult to detect and disprove, let's say, images that are generated by Gen AI. And we don't have the capacity to do that very well. We need to collaborate with like academic specialists and other specialists in the field, but they're not accustomed to actually responding as quickly as we need a response. These things get circulated instantaneously and widely, and it's very hard to catch up with all of that. So that puts us in pretty dangerous territory, and our profession really needs to do a lot more to sort of establish the infrastructure to respond quickly and to detect fakes and then to get the word out. We got a lot of work to do in that regard. We're totally ill-equipped to do that right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Been
Thank you. Thanks for
Wonderful
coming.
conversation.